This is Radio 97. We are talking law. Our resident lawyer, Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal in Runaway Bay, with us each and every Thursday morning. She brings her legal expertise and all her knowledge and her books with her every week. She provides some general advice on the latest hot topics. She has experience that spans more than 25 years in the area of property and commercial law. She prepares wills too as part of estate planning and litigation. With us once again on this Thursday. Hi, Despina.
Good morning, Wayne. Good morning, Brooke.
Good morning, Wayno. Good morning, Despina. And this morning we're talking sport on Talking Law, doing a double whammy here because about 400 soccer players, union players and rugby league players are involved in a new class action lawsuit against their associated leagues and federations. And Despina, I didn't know this, but you're a bit of a NRL fan, so you wanted to have a chat about this particular court case?
Yes, I am actually. I thought it's a great story to talk about because it's happening at the moment. But yeah, a little bit of trivia, I suppose. Am a rugby league fan and I love the sport, having been brought up in rugby league with my family. So since I was a little toddler, really. So been around more football fields than you can imagine. So yeah, understand the sport, love the sport. I don't know if I should dare mention who I go for.
Who do you go for? Spill the beans.
Well, it's not a team that's up the top of the ladder, but I can't go past the Bulldogs. So
doggies.
Yeah, always been a Bulldog fan, fortunately or unfortunately. But anyway.
I love it.
So it's a great sport. And because I suppose I love the sport and I understand the sport because I've watched so many matches in my lifetime, I thought that we would talk about it because it's a bit of a topic, a heated topic and a bit of a controversial one in some social settings. And, rugby league union, of course, has been around for a long time, and this involves soccer as well. And as I understand, there is currently a class action that's being brought about, I think, with a particular London law firm. And it's all about as I understand, the damage that can be done to rugby league players from playing rugby league or rugby union, whatever the sport is in this class action. And it involves, injuries such as concussion, such as the potential for, dementia or Parkinson's and things like that we have seen over the years with different football players that have played the sports involved. But I think that, I thought we'd have a general discussion about, well, where is this country heading when we've got class action suits like this, where we are trying to put blame and liability on the governing bodies, which will then filter down to, of course, the clubs, the coaches, the managers, for the players involved, when we are dealing with a sport where the players are adults. And in my view, and it could be a view that's not agreed by some, that's fine. But in my view, it's a sport where these players do understand or should understand the inherent risks and dangers playing, for example, rugby league. And let's, not beat around the bush. I mean, rugby league it does have inherent risks. I mean, you're out there. It's a physical contact sport. You're out there with scrums, with tackles. Players get injured all the time. But that's the nature of the game. That's the nature of playing rugby league, where you go into it eyes open. You understand that there are inherent risks. There are dangers, maybe more danger and risk for some players than others, depending on what position you play. Right.
Yeah.
And depending on whether those players have predispositions for certain injuries to occur anyway in their own body, including brain injuries. So, how far do we go in regulating this in this country? I suppose that's the question I'm posing out there in the community, and I'd be interested to hear from people.
Yeah, definitely. So you can contact us through Facebook if you do want to jump in. Let us know your opinion on this, because I know we have a big footy fan base that listen to this show. Not necessarily Bulldogs, sorry, Des, but people that do follow the footy quite close. And it's an open conversation, for everyone, because this particular lawsuit that has come up, these players, are they, just because I haven't read the whole thing, Despina, but are these players saying that they went into it unknowingly, unknowingly knowing these type of risks? Because that sounds pretty hard to believe.
This is what we want to find out. So the article talks about the link between playing the sport and suffering brain injury, you know, as a direct result. So obviously they've got to find that causal link, and that's what they're trying to establish. Now, for there to be a lawsuit, I believe what they're trying to establish is, well, players may not have been aware of the extent of the risks or potential risks of the injuries that they could suffer as a result of playing the sport. I think that's one aspect of it, but also I think there's another aspect that, and it'll come out in over the course of time, but I think the other aspect is that, well, how safe is the sport? Meaning, should there be a duty placed on the governing bodies to look at, is the sport safe enough? But, you know, should there be other things that are regulated? Should there be mandated headgear, for example? Should there be certain tackles that are outlawed? I think there are some that have already been outlawed as part of the game because they're inherently dangerous. But when you start doing that, my question to people out there, I suppose in my comment as well, is how far do you go to regulate a sport that already is inherently dangerous and risky? I mean, you could compare it to other sports. For example, motor racing. Motor racing is extremely dangerous. And how far is that regulated? The cars, you know, are built in a particular way. The drivers had headgear, yes. But other than that, you know, there's no one else out there talking about, well, what else do we have to do to regulate this very dangerous sport of motor racing where you're reaching high speeds on a racetrack? And that's, you know, just a comparison with one sport. There are other sports that have inherent risks. And I think I guess the point I'm trying to make is to try and regulate certain aspects is one thing. To say that, well, it's dangerous and people need to be more aware of how dangerous it is, so let's start, you know, covering them up and, you know, putting them in this little fluffy ball if they're going to go out on the field to play.
Well, think of the gridiron players. I mean, look at what they get dressed up in to go out on the field.
Exactly right. And that's, I think, a little bit of a different sport, but I suppose, yes, it's maybe a good comparison in some ways. And look, we may end up down a track where it's mandatory headgear. But I think that you've got players, and I could be wrong, that end up playing the sport where their eyes are open, meaning nobody goes into this sport thinking this isn't dangerous or I'm not going to get hurt. All you have to do is watch any rugby league match. There's always at least one player that gets hurt invariably. And sometimes we don't talk about the brain injuries. We're talking about sprained ankles. We're talking about knees. We're talking about shoulder injuries. Are we going to try and regulate that? Are we going to cover these players from head to toe to try and avoid injury? Why would you do that when the sport is already inherently risky and dangerous? People are aware of that as players, and they go into it knowing the risks. And I think this is about maybe sort of informing and educating the players, if not already, and I'm not saying the clubs don't do this, but how far do you go in educating and informing the players? Well, hey, you're at risk of potentially having or suffering these types of injuries. And if the players are aware and they go, yes, tick, this is for me, right?
Yep.
Then they've made their choice.
Yeah, that does actually sound like surely the way to go. For the moment you go into the top leagues, the NRL, you are made aware. You know, there's some sort of course that you go through, knowing at the end of which you say, okay, well, I understand all of these risks. I'm an adult. I'm willing to sign that I do understand the risks and
sign the contract.
Let the cards fall as they may.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm sure it may even be part of their contracts already. I would suspect it is. And if it's not, it'll be bolstered up even more. But what type of training do you give your players? And I think also it's the culture in this country. And I'm not saying there's anything, I suppose, wrong with the culture. So don't get me wrong. We have a culture in Australia of playing rugby league, which means being very manly and macho, and you can take the injuries. You're supposed to take them, being, you know, tough and brave and all that sort of thing. But I think that from an early age, maybe the culture in schools or clubs, you know, from under fives upwards, maybe they have to look at changing it, if not already, making sure children do wear headgear. I think that's very important as the the body is growing and developing and your brain is developing, yes, 100%. You're more prone to getting those head injuries as you're growing, yes. But I'm not a doctor, so I'm just saying common sense would prevail, wouldn't it, to say, well, you've got young children, they should be protected because they don't know of the risks. So they don't have the capacity to understand the inherent risks, whereas if you're an adult, you are supposed to understand what they are.
Yep, which is that's right. There's a very big difference. Just briefly before we finish up on this topic, Despina, the women's rugby league competition, of course, is now gaining popularity. What about there? What about the women and protection for them in the same situation?
Well, that's a good point, isn't it? I mean, I think that women are, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're required to have more protective gear in certain sports like boxing and like UFC or other sort of sports that they play. Why? Because the female brain or body is more prone to injuries. I mean, there is a big difference between men and women in terms of the physical stature. And yes, men perhaps can take more than women. They're not designed to take that physical contact, one would argue, a female as opposed to a male. But does that mean that men shouldn't be protected? So therein, lies the question. And I think it's a revolving argument that you could go around and around. All I'm saying is if you start with these class actions and then you start to regulate a sport even more, how far do you go? And I think it opens the door, whereas let's perhaps look at educating and training people and making sure they're fully aware of all the potential risks in playing the sport. And then you choose to do so. And you can also choose to wear protective gear if you wish.
Yep. And very last question, do you think the players will win this class action?
Oh, well, that's a tough question. I think that there's potential there for maybe a little win. But time will tell, of course. But I think regardless, there'll be some changes to the game at some level. I just hope that the true nature of the game doesn't change, because we all love the game, and but it's a very controversial issue. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and you can join in on the conversation on our Facebook page, Breakfast Radio 97 or Radio 97 104.1 and 103.5. Don't go anywhere. We are answering your question, Mike. Thank you so much for sending that in. It's coming up in just a moment on Talking Law.
Are you confused about legal jargon? Do you need legal advice but don't know where to turn? Tune in to Talking Law with Despina Priala every Thursday morning at 8:30 on Radio 97. Despina, a leading lawyer with over 20 years of experience, will demystify the law and provide practical advice to help you navigate legal issues. Whether it's a family matter, a property dispute, or a business concern, Talking Law has got you covered. Don't miss out on this valuable resource. Tune in to Talking Law with Despina Priala every Thursday morning at 8:30 on Radio 97.